a New York money real estate empire.
In the beginning, I don't think the police realized, the community didn't realize who they were dealing with.
His wife missing.
Well, I made a promise to Kathy that if anything ever happened to her, I wouldn't let Bob get away with it.
His best friend dead, shot in the head.
Susan did not deserve to be murdered.
His neighbor dead, shot in the head, his head still missing.
Maybe I wanted to get caught.
A wanted man.
I was the worst fugitive the world has ever met.
Is Robert Durst behind multiple murders?
I think he doesn't want to kill, but he doesn't like to be told no.
Is he wrongly accused? Was it an accident? Hello, and welcome to a special edition of the Law&Crime Network. I'm your host, Linda Kenney Baden. 76-year-old Robert Durst is charged in Los Angeles with killing his best friend Susan Berman in 2001. At his trial, prosecutors are bringing in 2 other deaths believed to be connected to him. This is not Robert Durst's first trial, but what we don't know is, was this his first murder?
It's kind of weird for me because I feel like I know you even though I've never met you.
That's L.A. prosecutor John Lewin sitting next to Robert Durst. Lewin flew out to New Orleans when he heard of the arrest of Robert Durst.
Well, 72 years old.
Okay.
Cancer survivor. I have hydrocephalus.
FBI agents arrested Robert Durst on a first-degree murder warrant in 2015. So how did he get here? Robert Durst, better known as Bob, married Kathleen McCormick in 1973. Bob and Kathy lived both in a cottage in South Salem, New York, and in a penthouse in New York City, while Bob worked for his family's real estate organization. Once the heir apparent to the Durst billion-dollar empire, Bob's father gave that title instead to his younger brother Doug. And friends say Bob and Kathy's marriage had turned violent.
She was afraid of him, but at the same time, it was a dichotomy where if she had a couple of drinks in her, she got stronger. Because I was basically saying, get the heck out. And she was afraid, but she thought she could handle him.
Reports suggest there were talks of a potential $250,000 divorce settlement. You said that you think that Kathy went home drugged up on cocaine and alcohol, confronted Bob, and what do you think happened next on the night of January 31st, 1982?
I do not think it was planned. I think they would get into tussles sometimes. And I think it was just, she was very aggravated, and I think she came on to him. For all I know, she could have hit him. But they went into it, and he probably picked up a fireplace poker or something. And maybe he didn't, I don't think he meant it. It wasn't planned, but he killed her.
Kathy was supposed to return the next morning to the city where she was attending school to become a doctor.
You know about the call to the dean, right?
A woman claiming to be Kathy Durst called into her New York medical school saying she wouldn't be coming in because she was sick.
And he said the only reason that he thought it was Kathy that called him was because the person that called on the phone said, it's Kathy. And by the way, that call was a big problem for New York because they're going, wait, if Kathy is dead, how can she be calling?
Investigators believe Durst had his best friend, Susan Berman, make that call.
She would have said no.
She would have said no?
She would not have risked her life for something like that.
Ellen Strauss, you are a self-described, loyal, dogged friend of Kathy Durst, and you have been after Robert Durst to be indicted, tried, and convicted.
Well, I made a promise to Kathy decades ago that if anything ever happened to her, I wouldn't let Bob get away with it, and I keep my promises.
For nearly 20 years, it appeared Kathy vanished. But in 1999, New York authorities and then prosecutor Jeanine Pirro unexpectedly reopened Kathy's case.
Most people, if they found out that their wife's case was being reinvestigated, they would be, wow, I'm so glad somebody's really looking at it. What made you run?
I really can't say why did I run when I did.
Durst is believed to have taken what authorities are calling the boldest step yet in the master plan to cover up the killing of his wife when he flew to San Francisco in December 2000.
I think, Bob, that you drove down to Los Angeles, that you drove down there, and
Killed Susan.
I do.
Drove back.
I was just trying to understand it. I didn't get
Yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah. I hear you. I hear you. I'm just not going to be able to answer that because I just don't.
Okay. Okay. Listen. That's fair. But you agree it's hard to explain.
Unusual.
Berman, a 55-year-old author and daughter of a Las Vegas mob boss, was living in Benedict Canyon, California.
The evidence is very clear what happened. She sees Mr. Durst, one of the few people she would ever let into her house in the middle of the night. She turns around to take care of the dogs, and the one saving grace in this case is that woman never knew the betrayal that happened. She's got to open the door. She's got to let him in. She shot what is in essence execution style at point blank range.
Days later, the Beverly Hills Police Department received a note saying Cadaver and Berman's address. The word Beverly was misspelled on the envelope.
There's only one reasonable inference. Whoever sent that note wanted the body found.
Robert Durst denies he murdered Berman.
There was absolutely no forensic evidence whatsoever that links him to the residence or being in the residence or being there at the time of the shooting. There is no eyewitness evidence that has him in the area or at the house or in any proximity to the house during that period of time.
The motive. The state says Susan Berman told Durst that New York detectives had contacted her about Kathy's disappearance, and she was going to talk.
Susan definitely told me that she'd been contacted by.
I'm gonna tell you something. That wasn't true. They had not contacted her. They were planning on contacting her. They had never contacted her.
No, I did not know
Yeah.
that they had not contacted
No.
her.
So what I'm telling you is, Susan lied to you about that. I think that Susan was trying to subtly squeeze you for money.
Durst flees to Galveston, Texas, rents an apartment, and poses as a mute woman. At some point, investigators believe Durst's neighbor, Morris Black, figured out his true identity. Durst shot and killed Morris Black on September 28, 2001.
There was a father and son who were fishing on Galveston Island, and there were several trash bags that they found floating in the water that were each contained a body part. There was a severed leg, another severed leg, severed arms that were in separate packages, and then there was the torso, but there was no head.
Has the head of Morris Black ever been found?
The head of Morris Black has never been found.
Judge Susan Crisp presided over the Galveston trial.
At the time, I had been a judge just for a few years. I'd been a prosecutor for 10, and I'd been a defense attorney for 3 at the time. They alleged that he murdered him. They weren't 100% sure about the means because there was no head. You know, and in the end, they believed that he probably shot him in the head, and that became what the defense actually admitted to, that he was shot in the head, because that's the only part of the body that wasn't found, and there's no bullet holes in the rest of the body.
So when you say they, you mean Robert Durst admitted to shooting Morris Black in the head?
Yes, but he claimed that it was in self-defense. Without the head, it's hard to dispute his version of what happened.
The defense recreated the scuffle and played it in front of the jury. On the stand, Durst shockingly admitted to shooting Black, but claimed self-defense. Did he appear credible to the jury?
I can't say what Robert Durst appeared to the jury. I can say what he appeared to me. He appeared to be sane. He appeared to be competent. I can't say that he appeared to be credible. He's very witty. He's very sharp.
Neither murder weapons in the Morris Black death or Susan Berman's death were ever recovered. A jury acquitted Durst of Morris Black's murder. Durst later pleaded guilty to bail jumping and evidence tampering for dismembering and disposing of Morris Black's body. After a brief time in prison, he was paroled. Let's talk a little bit about after the trial, a couple years after the trial. You came home on June 29th, 2006. This is 3 years later.
So I drove into my driveway and I saw something. It was in the street, but it was like right up against the sidewalk that leads to my house. But when I got out of my car and I looked at it, I realized it was not a dead rat. it was a severed cat. And it was, the cat had been severed behind the shoulder blades, so that it was the front legs and it was the head. I was horrified, I was terrified. It dawned on me that it could have been Robert Durst, because it's a severed head.
Durst, happy with his portrayal in the movie All Good Things, agrees to a sit-down interview that would become the HBO series The Jinx, the life and deaths of Robert Durst. Durst is confronted about the Cadaver Note and the misspelling of Beverly.
What the hell did I do?
In the final scene, Durst is heard in a bathroom, apparently not knowing he was still being recorded.
Killed them all. Of course.
After the scene aired, authorities sought to arrest Durst for Berman's death. The FBI tracked Durst to a New Orleans hotel on March 14, 2015. Cops found fake IDs, cash, and a loaded handgun.
Mr. Durst, when myself and detectives interviewed him in New Orleans, Your Honor, he basically confessed to this crime.
Going forward, I told my life expectancy is about 5 years. So there's not much that I could agree with anybody that somebody could offer me, unless they could offer me more life.
Right.
Mr. Lewin is holding the cards, and Mr. Durst then responds to it by saying, I'm 72 years old, I've only got 5 years to live, you can't do anything for me.
Durst's attorneys allege prosecutorial misconduct and a violation of his Fifth and Sixth Amendment rights. He's charged with 1 count of first-degree murder.
Susan, despite everything, did not deserve to be murdered. Kathy certainly didn't deserve to be murdered. Even the crazy neighbor across the hall from Bob in Galveston, Morris Black, didn't deserve to be murdered.
The thing of it is, obviously, when you look at those pictures, the only conclusion is that's not the first body he's cut up. You can't be that good at it the first time.
Where did you put her body? I'd also want to know if he cut her up or buried her whole. Because according to neighbors, there was a light on in his basement all night long. I want to know what he was doing down there when he supposedly had put her on a train to New York.
If you had to say something to the judge in California, Judge Mark Wyndham, who will be trying the Durst case for the murder, the killing, the execution, the assassination of Susan Berman, what would you say to him?
I would say be prepared to be surprised, because whatever you think is going to happen, there's going to be a whole lot more that you have no idea.
We've never been mic'd up in court, and we believe, and if I'm misspeaking, I apologize, that Mr. Lewin has been for these cameras, so. All right. Well,
I turn it off when I go to the bathroom, though, Your Honor.
More explosive moments, an exclusive interview with the defense, and an inside look at the forensics when we return. Before trial, the prosecution and defense made a series of concessions agreeing to certain facts of the case. This document contains about 300 stipulations by both parties. What they say happened, you won't believe it.
Whoever wrote the note was a part of killing her.
Yes.
You agree, right?
Yes.
No question, right?
Whoever wrote that note had to be involved in Susan's death.
Okay.
For years, Durst denied writing the now infamous Cadaver Note. The state's handwriting experts compared the letter to a note he's known to have mailed Susan.
They said you wrote it. They said no question. Can you tell me which one of these you didn't write?
I couldn't begin to.
Yeah, because they look identical. Agreed?
If not identical, extremely similar.
Durst is represented by the same 3 legendary attorneys who got him off the murder charge for Morris Black: Dick DeGuerin, David Chesnoff, and Chip Lewis. On the eve of this trial, they now admit he is the author, telling reporters, this does not change the facts that Bob Durst didn't kill Susan Berman, and he doesn't know who did.
With respect to the question of whether or not we can raise during the trial the reports of the supervisor and the original handwriting examiner that another person actually wrote the note, the court
as well as the state have acknowledged really how terrible job those people did and how actually could probably border on some form of obstruction.
If you had killed Kathy, would you tell me?
No.
Okay, you know what, if you had killed Susan, would you tell me?
No.
But in another shocking stipulation, jurors will hear evidence that Durst coerced his wife Kathy into having an abortion.
We were in love, period. No two ways about it. We were in love. That lasted about 2 years.
Right.
And then we had the thing with the abortion.
Right.
And that was the end of it.
And as for Durst's so-called bathroom confession,
There it is. You're caught.
the defense concedes, quote, interviews that the people have played and or will play in court during this trial are true and accurate copies of those interviews. Jurors will not watch the Jinx, but will watch unedited interviews of Durst.
They know it's edited. That's not how they're going to use it. They're not going to be any part of those shenanigans. Doesn't change the fact that it's very illustrative of what Hit the Ground Running was trying to do. They didn't bother to tell the people, hey, we turned the order around here so it sounds a lot more damning than it actually was.
Defense attorneys accuse the TV producers of working as agents of the state.
In our line of work, it's hard to believe in coincidences, Your Honor, and I certainly don't believe Mr. Jarecki's version of this coincidence.
Among other stipulations, both sides agreed Berman made 2 deposits of $25,000 each. The bridge, dig note found at Durst's house after the disappearance of Kathy, was also written by Durst. And the jurors will also see the morbid tools Durst used in the Morris Black case, including this trash container and a bow saw used to dismember him. So in any trial, in any prosecution, there is a prosecutor and a defense, and there's a judge. So let me bring my panel in. First, let me bring to you the former president of the New Jersey State Bar. You know him well, Bob Hilla. He's been on before. Hi, Bob.
Hi, Linda.
And then our prosecutor for the day, Bernardo Villalona, who's going to tell us why certain things are necessary for Mr. Lewin to bring in. Hello.
Hey, Linda, how's it going?
And also, obviously, Gene Rossi, a law and crime legal analyst. Gene, you're in Virginia. You're going to start breaking down some of these rulings to tell us what the law really should be. So let me start with Bernardo. Bernardo, there is a cadaver note. Okay, that is a big note. It is misspelled Beverly with an E before Y. The prosecution was bringing it in beforehand, but going to have to prove that Bob Durst authored it. The defense agreed. Why is this note so important?
Well, it's definitely crucial because when we look at all the evidence that we have so far, and we know that whoever wrote that note, because it was postmarked before the body was discovered, had something to do or was actually involved with the death of Susan Berman. Now, taking that into account and also taking into account that Robert Durst, during his interview to the Jinx, before he was confronted with his own handwriting, he said whoever wrote that note was definitely involved, had something to do with the death of Susan Berman. Of course, how else can anybody else have known about that? So he is actually admitting to it before he's even confronted that was his note.
Well, is he really? Bob Haley, is that admitting to a murder, or is that admitting to, hey, I found the body of my best friend, I want to tell somebody because I can't tell them?
Well, first of all, with respect to the note, it probably shouldn't have come in. There should have been some challenges. There may have been some challenges before the stipulation was forced on this. But secondly, I think that's right. You know, it does show knowledge. It shows knowledge that there may be a cadaver there. The cadaver may be his friend. But at the best, all it establishes is that he was guilty of writing a note and sending it to the police. It doesn't say anything about the absence of any direct evidence in this case linking him to the crime.
But in his own words, during the interview at the Jinx, he said specifically that only the killer could have written.
Okay, so that was the interview we're talking about with Lewin also, okay? Now, let me ask Gene Rossi. Gene Rossi, this sounds to me like Robert Durst has a story to tell, and Robert Durst, whether his attorneys want him to do it or not, is going to take the stand. That's what I'm thinking. What are you thinking?
He is absolutely, positively going to take the stand.
Whoa.
If he took the stand, he's got nothing to lose. If he took the stand in the Morris Black case, and hit it out of the park with the bases loaded, he was acquitted, you can guarantee he's going to take the stand. Here's why. He thinks people like him. He thinks people are entertained by his humor and his wry comments. And here's the thing. He's going to argue, when I was talking to that prosecutor in New Orleans, I was playing him like a fiddle, and I wasn't confessing to whether the earth was round. And regarding the note, I'll guarantee there's some little story they're going to come up with, either through his testimony or another witness, that places him at the scene of the murder after the murder occurred.
Okay,
that's
so
what's going to happen.
So, Gene, you say people like him. He thought the
No.
prosecutor. Wait. He thought the prosecutor.
No.
Oh,
I said
he thinks the people like. I got it. So, but I want you to listen. I want you all to listen, though, because he spoke to Mr. Lewin, the prosecutor, and he talked about something concerning how much time he has left to live. Let's listen to what he told the prosecutor. Let's see if we think we like him.
Going forward, I told my life expectancy is about 5 years. So there's not much that I could agree with anybody that somebody could offer me, unless they could offer me more life, right? Something like that. There's just not much I can say. Listen, look at this. I just have no idea how we could reach an agreement on something.
Going to Susan Berman, and let's say there's other alleged crimes here, according to the prosecutor. So, guys, okay, this judge is allowing the abortion, allegedly, that occurred, well, admittedly, according to Durst, that occurred with Kathy Durst into this trial as part of this motive. Why, Bernarda?
Because it goes to show how controlling, how demanding, how much power he had over this woman.
Bob Hilley, controlling, demanding power over this. What does that have to do with the Susan Berman's murder?
Nothing to do with the Susan Berman case. All it shows is it's an event that happened with a person who was his former wife in a case that we don't even know what happened to her.
So, Jean Rossi, there is a medical record. When she went to medical school, she said that in 1976, she had a septic meningitis. This is public record that the prosecution released it. Could the defense turn this around and say, hey, the abortion wasn't because he was forcing her, but because she had a disease which would have affected the baby?
The prosecution is a moron because there's a federal rule of evidence called 403. This is unduly prejudicial, and all you're doing, prosecution, is giving the defense an appealable issue. This is crazy.
So let me ask all of you this. Two things. There's $50,000 deposited in Susan Berman's account, two $25,000 checks. The prosecutor is going to say that possibly she was shaking him down because she knew who killed, according to them, it was a murder, Kathy Durst. The defense is going to say, what? Bob Hilley.
If you pay her, why are you going to kill her? And if you're as controlling as they say Robert Durst was, he was controlling her with that money, so why kill her for that reason?
Well, they said that indeed, that supposedly the detectives were going to contact her. She's going to spill her beans. But let's listen to a clip.
And she was a foot person for him before.
Let's listen to a clip about what the detectives actually said.
Susan definitely told me that she'd been contacted by
I'm gonna tell you something. That wasn't true. They had not contacted her. They were planning on contacting her. They had never contacted her.
No, I did not know that they had not contacted her.
So what I'm telling you is, Susan lied to you about that. I think that Susan was trying to subtly squeeze you for money.
You never would have brought up anything like that. And yes, she was always telling me about her money problems, but she never, quote unquote, squeezed me for it. Bobby, if you don't give me enough money to do such and such, I'm going to do such and such. I never heard anything like that from Susan.
Jean Rossi, who is the defense going to say killed Susan Berman?
I have no clue, but it's not going to be Robert Durst. It may be a mobster. It may be a burglar, a burglary gone awry. Who knows?
Bob Hilley, let me ask you this, okay? Why couldn't it be Robert Durst who dressed as a female with the wig? Why did it have to be Kathy? Why did it have to be Susan? That's the motive.
Well, the state's got established by direct evidence. This case is all about an obsession with Durst and the prosecution's effort to write a new ending to a Hollywood fictional tale without any direct evidence.
So you're the prosecutor using Susan Berman. If she's a blackmailer, how's the jury going to feel sympathy for her?
Well, she's not a blackmailer. Obviously, she's the one that is connected, the confidant of Mr. Durst, the poor Mr. Durst who's saying that he has 5 years to live. Cry me a river. Susan Berman knows all your dirt, and you were trying to get rid of her just days before she was going to rat you out.
And that's what the prosecutor is going to say. I think when, of course, when we get to a jury. Real quick question. Conviction? No.
Conviction.
Bob?
Acquittal.
Gene?
Conviction.
Wow, we'll see, because you, the viewers, are also going to have to decide along with this jury. But when we come back, we have a lot more brewing here. You have to stay tuned. An exclusive interview with one of the defense attorneys on the team, David Chesnoff. What is the defense case? Is there an alternate suspect? Reasonable doubt? Take a listen to this clip of the pretrial hearing to determine the admissibility of that cadaver note, and a lot more.
A suspect who they knew had failed a polygraph about this, by the way, Your Honor.
That's wait, Your Honor, they're mentioning the Your Honor, can you...
I'm interrupting, but you can.
Wait, Your Honor, can you admonish them? Your Honor, it's misconduct for them to be discussing Your Honor, tell me I'm wrong. I'm wrong?
I'm bringing it up because it was an investigative tool used by the police, and then lo and behold, the guy that they utilized the investigative tool is identified as the person who writes the note.
Yes.
Then they switch to Durst. And now all of a sudden, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. The supervisor's a liar, and we're not allowed to tell that story to the jury, Your Honor? I don't understand it, to be honest with you.
Joining me now is Robert Durst's legendary defense attorney, David Chesnoff. He is co-counsel with the also legendary Dick DeGuerin and Chip Lewis in the case of State of California versus Robert Durst. David, how are you?
I'm wonderful. Thank you for having me.
Okay, I've known you for a while, but I'd like the viewers to get to know you a little bit. So could you tell me a little bit about you and your style of trying cases?
Thank you. Well, I actually grew up on the East Coast, but I've been in Las Vegas for 40 years. I was fortunate enough to be partners with Oscar Goodman, former mayor of Las Vegas and former real legendary lawyer, criminal lawyer. I've done cases in 32 of the 50 states, including Hawaii and Alaska. My style is pretty aggressive. I'm very big on preparation, cross-examination, and I try to anticipate as much as I can what we're going to see from the other side. In this case, we have a very determined, experienced, and hardworking prosecutor who I would venture to say knows the case as well as anybody could. So Dick and Chip and I, and the other lawyer in the case is Don Ray, who's the go-to guy in Los Angeles. We have our work cut out for us.
Well, I know whoever you represent, you're going to do a good job. But speaking about whoever you represent, I'm also, as you know, after I was a prosecutor, I've been a defense attorney, and I've taken cases for a number of people who I would say are hated by the public, are not popular. Some considered the most hated people on earth at the time. I would imagine that Robert Durst is not liked if you take the media that's out there. So I want you to tell me, as a defense attorney, why did you take this case, or why do you take any such case where there is such public rancor?
Well, first of all, I think it's the obligation of anybody who calls themselves a criminal defense lawyer to represent those people most in need, people that are considered underdogs. I've always been like that. Even as a kid, I always stood up for the underdog. It's a constitutional responsibility. You cannot call yourself a criminal defense lawyer and pick and choose who you represent based on whether or not the public at the time of their indictment or their arrest likes them. One of the jobs of the lawyer is to humanize the client, and I'm comfortable, like they did once before in Galveston, that the jury's going to know that Mr. Durst is not anything but a fellow who I think has been persecuted and has been targeted. And I would tell you that in that case, that's what a lawyer has to do. So I've never really been concerned with public opinion. I've represented people whose politics are the opposite of mine. who are, have been alleged to have done terrible things. But that just goes with the territory. And like I said, I'm trying not to repeat myself, you can't be a criminal lawyer and pick and choose.
So I've gone through the Galveston thing. And by the way, you cannot be prosecuted for that murder again. You're aware of that?
I'm aware of that.
I looked at and I listened to and I reread the tapes in New Orleans where Mr. Lewin, the prosecutor in this case, flew to New Orleans and interviewed the suspect in the case that he's trying for the killing of Susan Berman. I, as a criminal defense lawyer and a prosecutor, have quite frankly never seen that before. Usually it's the lead investigator. Do you think the level of involvement of Mr. Lewin is something that you can utilize as a defense attorney for the benefit of Mr. Durst?
Without giving away secrets of what's planned, I think it will be an issue in the case. He is driven, this prosecutor. As I said earlier, he knows it inside and out. He not only went and interviewed Mr. Durst, he's interviewed most of the witnesses in the case and led the interrogation of those witnesses. So I think at some point in time it will arise in the courtroom, but I'll let your viewers see the results of that once they happen.
Here's what I'm looking for.
I'm not about to say to you, what is your name again?
John.
John. I'm not about to say to you, John, this is it without my lawyer being.
Okay.
I can't ask you to tell us because I would be betraying secrets, even though I really want to know. But we will obviously, with that little tidbit, be watching this case in great interest, as will, I'm sure, everybody will on both sides. And I really want to thank you for joining Law and Crime, the Law and Crime Network. We're talking about a man who's been labeled as extremely dangerous, terrifying, and a murderer, Robert Durst. When a man was killed in Galveston, Texas in 2001, a local newspaper hired private investigator Bobby Baca to figure out who he was. I spoke with Bobby about the death of Morris Black and what she uncovered about Robert Durst and her investigation.
When Morris Black was killed in Galveston, Texas, he was dismembered and dumped into the Galveston Bay, and no one knew who he was at first. So we did a full locate on him and background and found out he was a very mysterious man, but we did find that he had several foster sisters and brothers and some brothers that were pretty close. The family members of Morris Black, one of them asked us to basically look into further what happened to his brother, because he said that he had a feeling that we would get to the bottom of it, as far as why he was killed by Robert Durst.
There was a brown suitcase along the edge of the shoreline where the body bags were floating that no one has ever found?
Correct. The suitcase was gone. Robert Durst came back to get that suitcase. I believe the head was in the suitcase because we did the entire grid search of the waters. We found no head in that water. If we found the head would be like the weight of a bowling ball. It would not float, even if it was deflated or something inside, something swollen. It still would be too heavy to float. It'd be on the ground. And they did find that he took a blanket to the dry cleaners to have it cleaned. He's so strange in his mind. He thinks if he dry cleans the bloody blanket, it will take all the evidence out, which it probably did.
What does it tell you that the body was chopped up in this very professional manner, cleanly below the joints?
It's not a novice doing that. This is somebody who has done this before. He has experience. And that's what's so scary about this whole episode. And also, when Robert Durst was in court talking about chopping up the body, he said he was literally swimming in blood. And then he went back to his very expensive hotel and ordered a Caesar salad and ate that after doing this. He's very sociopathic. He has no remorse. He has no empathy for people. To me, Robert Durst is a serial killer. And I think we're going to find out that Robert Durst is probably one of the most vicious and ruthless serial killers we've ever seen in the United States. Robert Durst had so many different AKAs when I did the background on him. One of the AKAs he was arrested under recently was one that he had only recently created that we found. He has, not only can he be a woman, he can be a man. He takes on many different identities. And remember, he has millions, I think maybe billions of dollars. He can go anywhere and be anyone. When we did the investigation, we found out that Morris Black mysteriously went off the radar, pretty much off the grid after, Kathy Durst disappeared. And also, so did his brother.
Are you familiar with the allegations in the Kathleen Durst disappearance?
Yes, I am.
You know that there was a note found, and that note indicated something about a bridge.
Yes.
What does that tell you?
I just think that Robert Durst dumps these bodies near water, and I think that he chops them up, and I think that he may even spread out the debris. And there's one thing he didn't know about Galveston. Galveston does not give up its dead. They wash back up. So this body wasn't washing out like Robert Durst thought.
On that note, let me bring in my investigative panel. First, Lisa Lockwood, you know her well. She's been on the Law&Crime Network. She is a retired police officer. She's a retired SWAT, retired investigator. We go to her as one of the go-to people, and today we need a go-to person. And then, of course, our other go-to person, also in California like Lisa, is Sergeant Cheryl Dorsey, also retired police officer, has investigated many crimes. She gives me the zen, and she also shows me what concentration can be like when you're investigating and what you should do. And of course, our forensic expert here at the Law&Crime Network, Joseph Scott Morgan, who is also a teacher. Right now, he's in Alabama, so I'm going to go for you, Joseph, because you are a forensic guy. There was an issue about Morris Black. The prosecution is retrying it. So what I want to ask you, I want you to tell me, did you bring any implements today to describe to our viewers how it could be that Morris Black could be sawed apart?
Yeah, actually I did, Linda. I brought with me today a bow saw, which has been alluded to on any number of occasions. You can look down the line here and kind of see the teeth of this. This is actually meant to use to saw off limbs on trees and this sort of thing. And
Joseph, let me just stop you. The bow saw was supposedly used to bow saw and cut up Morris Black. Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah, actually it is. That's what's been told. They found evidence of this at the scene relative to a bow saw itself. And let me tell you something. I spent a lot of years working in the morgue. I've dissected a lot of bodies and this sort of thing. This is not an easy task if you don't have the right tools. First off, you just don't simply take a saw and then begin to saw a bone like I've attempted to saw this PVC pipe. You can see it takes quite a bit. What you have to do before you even get to the bone is dissect away the soft tissue. That's the muscle, the skin, and this takes time. So in this process of this dismemberment, whoever did this, if he's admitted to it, whoever did this, he would have had to have had a protracted period of time where the body, he's talking about he's awash in blood, all right? That's the honest to God truth. I can verify that because I've worked in the morgue. I've seen what this is like to literally disassemble a body, and you have to have some base understanding of human anatomy and how to disassemble a body. You just
okay,
don't
Joseph, let's hold that thought. Let's now talk about, we have some exclusive information here on the Law&Crime Network. We are told that when the investigation was reopened into the death of Kathy Durst, or they think is the death of Kathy Durst because she's never been found and no one's ever been prosecuted, that indeed there was a discussion about looking at an old railroad bridge called L-158 about 10 miles from Robert Durst's house. It is 12 feet above water. It's 16 feet wide. And it was still usable after it was not used for a railroad. Now, I want you to tell me, we told that search didn't happen by the New York Police Department and probably didn't happen because it was too late by the state police. But if there is a dig note that we know that says bridge and water, I want to go now to Cheryl, okay? Cheryl, in light of that, you see that dig note, bridge, water, there's a bridge there close, surrounded by woods. Why wouldn't that be searched? And where's the places you would hide a body?
Well, listen, I can't speak to why they didn't search it. Certainly they should have, so we wouldn't be asking this question some years later, but what I want to know is we've heard evidence that there was a light on in the basement in his residence. It's not uncommon or unusual for folks to bury bodies in a place near and around where they live, understanding that previous body parts have washed up once thrown in water. Maybe the residence, maybe what was going on in that basement should have been looked at. And so these are questions that beg to be answered, in my opinion.
Yeah, and Cheryl, you know, they went down to New Jersey in the Pine Barrens for 3 days away. You made a call. But, you know, patterns are important, Lisa Lockwood, aren't they, when you're investigating a case? And tell us what the pattern is here that you know from the facts you've heard.
They are. Two things stood out for me in this case specifically. Anybody that crosses Durst, anybody that's close to Durst ends up either missing, beheaded, or shot in the back of the head. So the relationship with him is something that's indisputable. He's a gun guy. We know that. He owned weapons. We know that Morris was shot in the head, although we weren't able to find his head to find out exactly what happened with him. We know that Susan Berman was shot in the back of the head. This is a guy that has guns, and he's not afraid to use his guns.
So, Joseph, I want you to give it to me in 20 seconds. What are the benefits of being able to find a body, or can you find a body after 40 years or other evidence of a crime? Tell us, just list the things you can find.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's really compelling about this is, how was the body disposed of? Did they take time with it? Did they cocoon the body in plastic? Was the hole hastily dug, or was it really mapped out really well and secluded? Was it near a roadway, or was it way back in the woods where an individual would feel comfortable? This gives you literally a profile of how the person was thinking that was disposing of the body. And so, did they bury it with clothing? Did they bury it with items? Was the body cleaned? Is there anything left behind? And in certain cases, you can find evidence still in those grave sites. I found it up to 80 years later in certain clandestine graves that I've uncovered.
And Cheryl Dorsey, then you could probably find shoe leathers or bases of shoes and buttons and whatever may be left. But there has been no indication there's even been a crime here, because there's no body, no prosecution. So as a police officer, now 40 years later, what do? What's your prime investigative technique?
Well, we know that there's obviously something has happened, because this person didn't just disappear and not engage in any normal day-to-day activities. And so at this point, I want to look at the places that weren't looked at in the very beginning and see if we can glean some of that same kind of evidentiary items that were just referred to.
And Lisa Lockwood, then, if the information, Law and Crime has been given exclusively, that this bridge, it talked about L-158, that I have here, you can go get it on Google, it's also called Golden's Bridge, even though Golden's Bridge is across from it. Close by, it would have been flowing water, not the frozen lake like behind Robert Durst's house. Would you now go and look at that?
There'd be no reason not to. There'd be no reason, even after all of this time, why not? If you find a piece of wardrobe, some type of DNA, if something was preserved, if anything was put into bags, body parts, etc., anything that was washed up, the DNA can still be there.
So, Cheryl Dorsey, there was an indication that Kathy Durst, and that's also one of the things the prosecution is going to do. They're going to say there was a murder of Kathy Durst. This is a motive. And we don't have much time, but if there is a motive of Kathy Durst, okay, why did Susan Berman have to be involved? Why couldn't Bob Durst, dressed up like we know as a woman, in a wig, and walk out of that house, or walk out of that penthouse, walk down the street and away from everyone and never was heard from again?
Well, we heard that she was a confidant. Sandy was a confidant, and probably may have participated in part and parcel of helping him to give the appearance that his wife may have just walked away or didn't come to work and is somewhere, to be found yet. And so I think it's important that we talk to, that we look at all of the things that Berman knew, could have known, and could have exposed. And that's why she's not here. There's only one version to tell now, and that's the one that Robert Durst tells.
All right, I only have about 10 seconds for each of you. So, Joseph, do you think they'll ever find the body of Kathy Durst?
I think that it will be very, very difficult after this period of time. It's going to take an all-out commitment.
That's a no, right? That's a no. Lisa Lockwood, ever find the body of Kathy Durst?
I don't believe so.
Cheryl Dorsey, do you think they'll ever find the body of Kathy Durst?
No, I think too much time has passed, and I think that ship has sailed.
Well, you know what? I want to thank you all, because we hope that there is some, and closure is not a good word for the family, because Kathy Durst, Morris Black, and the death of Susan Berman will be star evidence in the trial against Robert Durst when he goes to trial. I just want to say one thing, because we have been working on this here at Law&Crime Network, to the family of Kathy Durst. Kathy McCormick is her name. They lost her in 1982, okay? This world lost a future, very sensitive, exceptional future pediatric doctor. We don't want to forget her in all this, because even though the Susan Berman trial is not going to resolve was there a murder there, it is also about her. I'm Linda Kenney Baden. This is Law&Crime Network. Stay with us. Thank you.